It's good to be up here. I have the privilege, the honor, the misfortune, of starting our summer series on conversational apologetics. And so, a bit different than what we normally do. We spent years just doing kind of more textual stuff, which is great. We thought, let's just take a brief break in the summer. I think it's like 8 or 9 lessons, and talk about issues. Talk about apologetics. And if you don't know what that's referring to, don't worry. We're going to get into that. It's not just saying you're sorry, right? We're not saying that as Christians, we need to say we're sorry more. That's not what this is going to be about. We're going to be talking about, really, I think, the issues that people are dealing with, right? Questions about origin. Where did I come from? Like, if God exists, that kind of changes things, right? Purpose. Like, what was I made for? Why am I here? Meaning. Like, is there any meaning? Destination. Where are we going? Is there an end to this? Those questions are kind of like the big 4 things that people in general struggle with. People in general, they have an answer for those things, either explicitly, like they've made a decision on these things and it informs the way they live, or they just kind of push it off and just life just happens to them. But as Christians, we need to be thinking about these kinds of things, especially as it relates to our witness, right? How are we engaging people? All of us here have friends, family, relations, acquaintances that are at various, places, in various places in life, right? Have various belief systems, various practices, right? But we here are Christians. We're Christians. And we've been called to be ministers of reconciliation, to be the love of God in this world to people. To do that, you've got to be in people's lives. You have to be relating to them in some way. So we're going to spend the summer, hopefully, just exploring some of the big questions, providing tools so that if you are in conversations with your loved ones, your friends, you have something to bring to them. Right? You can speak with confidence concerning the truths of the faith and the truth of the gospel. And so, to dive into it here, I wanted to spend a little bit of time on some stats, some statistics, right? So you may have heard of the Barna group, and this might be kind of hard to see, but they did a recent survey of U.S. teens and adults, okay? And they kind of broke it up into various categories. This is pretty recent. The teens and adults was in 2022, and then they also surveyed pastors from 2022 to 2023. And they have it broken up here between pastors, all Christians, practicing Christians, non-practicing Christians, other faith, and no faith. And the question was asked, do any of the following cause you to doubt Christianity or to doubt Christian beliefs? And so these were the responses. It might be kind of hard to see. You got pastors here in the green. Maybe I shouldn't stand in front of that. We have, I guess that's pink or beige. I don't know what that color is. The second one, that's all Christians. Then you have practicing Christians, non-practicing in yellow. I guess orange or red or other faiths, and then no faiths. And looking at this, I thought it was kind of interesting, kind of highlighted for no faith, like people who don't believe. And by the way, if you want these things, I do have the sources here, but if you just go to the Barna group or whatever, they have all this stuff available. You can just search kind of keywords, and it'll pull up things for you. They have tons of stuff. They're pretty well known for kind of doing these surveys on the state of the church, the state of Christianity, and so on. So I thought it fascinating that of this group of no faith, the primary reasons they gave for doubting Christian beliefs were past experiences with religious institutions, the hypocrisy of religious people, the negative reputation of the church. And so those three things are just kind of like, wow, that's talking about like our practice. That's talking about us as individuals. How do we present ourselves as Christians? That's how do we relate to the world around us? That seems big, right? People of no faith, 42% of them said that the hypocrisy of quote-unquote religious people causes them to doubt Christian beliefs. But then you have kind of another category, which I thought was interesting. The question of human suffering. 30% said that the problem of human suffering causes them to doubt Christian beliefs. That's kind of an existential, an intellectual obstacle that people have to Christianity. They also said one religion can't have all the answers. And so the idea of truth, like, who are you to say that Christianity is true, kind of thing, right? Science, right? 31% said science makes them doubt Christian beliefs. Conflict in the world. So we look out, especially the last few years here, we have, wars going on. We have the Ukraine and Russia conflict. You have Israel with its Iranian and the Iranian proxies, Hezbollah and Hamas and so on. You have Chinese aggression against Taiwan. There's these wars, and there's more than that. These are just the ones that show up, in popular media, right? The big ones, right? But conflict in the world is a big thing that causes people to doubt Christian beliefs, specifically those of no faith. But then you keep going, and for the non-practicing Christians, that is, these are nominal Christians in name, right? They don't really practice Christianity. They're not part of a church regularly. They said some of the big reasons here are the hypocrisy of religious people. So there's another one there. Human suffering is another big one. Conflict in the world, right? And so it's very interesting to me. You have these people are turned off or they doubt Christian beliefs, even non-practicing Christians. You can see that there's categories for them all, but the big ones I thought were in that non-practicing group, non-practicing Christians and no faith, where they see Christianity and it just seems inauthentic, it seems hypocritical, they had bad experiences, they don't like what they see, and then they look at the world and they have questions about, what's the point of all this? We have all this suffering, we have all this conflict, right? Science disproves religion. It's arrogant or judgmental to say that you know the truth. Moving forward, they also did a survey. This is over 20 years, just to kind of track the relationship that Americans have to Christianity. So I think it's important to talk about Americans because we're Americans. We're living in the U.S., and these are the people who are closest to us in terms of ministry, our own countrymen. And in 2000, 45% of Americans identified as, practicing Christians. But 2011, 2012, look at that. Just bloop, went down. It's crazy. And we see now it's down to 25% of Americans. So what happened to these practicing Christians? Where did they go? Well, Barna found that of this group, we see that the at least what accounts for it is a lot of practicing Christians are just leaving the faith, right? Agnosticism and atheism went up from 11% in 2003 to 21% in 2018. You have the rise of agnosticism. You have the rise of atheism. You may have heard of the new atheists, right? You have like Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris. Who's that guy who calls God a moral monster? He went to the Apologetics conference, Seth. Barker. Dan Barker, and there's one more. It wasn't Christopher Hitchens, right? These guys who, are pseudo-intellectuals releasing these books, and they, when I say pseudo-intellectual, I mean, they're some of them are philosophers. Richard Dawkins is not a philosopher. He's an evolutionist, right? They're writing these books at the popular level that are questioning Christianity. Well, not just Christianity, religions in general, but Christianity seems to be the focus. And so I think we do have this rise of the new atheism, which we haven't met. Like we haven't. It's continuing. These guys are still relevant. Barna also found that between 2011 and 2019, there was a drop in increase in church dropouts. And so, let's see specifically. So it's an increase, right? Hold on, let me.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Does that mean, so like people were dropping out of church before?
Right.
At like 55, 59%.
59% of people who grew up going to church would drop out. And that's risen to 64%. So the church dropout rate is increasing. Yeah. Right. So I was curious about that. They didn't have anything as of yet. At least I couldn't find it. Like, okay, what happened in 2020 and then on? The first survey I showed was post-pandemic, but I couldn't find anything specifically about attendance. And so I imagine it's even higher, right? Even higher. And so, and this is among Christians too, these stats. We just have Christians leaving the church, right? Leaving Christianity. What's going on? What is going on? Why are Christians rethinking their faith? And I think that it really comes down to two major categories. There's intellectual reasons and there's relational reasons. And we saw that first chart that kind of brought that out, right? There's our actual just public witness, like how we conduct ourselves as Christians. But then there's intellectual obstacles. Barna did another survey asking, like, what are the biggest reasons that you left the church? And it's like a third of respondents said, well, Christianity is anti-science, right? Christianity is antagonistic towards science. I'm a Christian. I don't believe that's true, right? But that's the perception. Why is that the perception? Another 30% said that churches are often afraid of other beliefs. They're afraid of beliefs other than their faith, right? Like we're insecure, and so we get dogmatic and judgmental, right? They feel that they're forced to choose between their friends and their faith. 36% said that the church feels unfriendly to those who doubt, to those who wrestle with doubt. And they gave some other things as well. But why is this the perception? Why is this the state of the church? I think part of it is there are some problems with the church. There's some problems with Christianity at large. And I'm not saying that we, as Renewal Church here in Waxhaw, with 40 people, are going to change that, right? We're not going to change the state of things, right? But we do have control over what we do, right? And we can take some of these things and consider, okay, are we the kind of church are we just one of those statistics? Are we? So I'm not saying that, having all this, we're going to be able to change things in the grand scheme. We're not going to be able to move the needle, as it were, on these statistics. But we can make a difference to those who we have here, to those who are around us, to the people that we meet, right? We can be the love of Christ to them. We can present the gospel in a winsome way to them. The other thing is, there's a problem with Christianity at large, I think, the church in general, right? Something's going on. There's either an anti-intellectualism or just not a lot of grace or something. And then we have to also keep in mind that the enemy is working, right? The enemy is working, right? We don't battle against flesh and blood. The enemy's working. So what can we do as Renewal Church to equip ourselves to deal with these kinds of issues, these kinds of critiques, these kinds of doubts and skepticisms, and so on, so that people can see the cross, so that people can see the cross clearly, see the love of Christ clearly. And I think this is where apologetics comes in. This is where we, as Christians, need to be equipped to deal with these kinds of challenges and issues, right? So that we can meet people where they're at, as Paul did, right? To the Jews, he became a Jew. To the Greek, he became a Greek. He met them where they were at. He met them on common ground and showed them the truth of the gospel. And this is kind of my theme verse, I guess. In 1 Peter, Peter writes and says, "But sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts, always being ready to make a defense to everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that is in you, yet with gentleness and reverence." Some translations might say with meekness and fear, right? Or gentleness and respect. This idea of making a defense. This is where we get the word apologetics. It's apologia. Literally means to defend oneself, make a formal justification, make an argument, or give an explanation. But notice it's not just that. He says to do it with gentleness and reverence, right? So this Greek word is not about apologizing. It's about giving an explanation, giving a reason, right? And Socrates' apology, it wasn't him sitting there apologizing for the crimes that they accused him of, right? It was him giving a defense, right? Giving an explanation. And so we can do this. And I think there's many reasons to do this. Hold on, I'm going to go back here, figure out where I'm at. Make a defense. Do it with gentleness and reverence. And so that's kind of what we'll be exploring in this series, right? Is how do we do this? What kinds of questions are out there? How do we know what we believe, but can we give reasons for why? Can we give reasons for the hope that is in us? Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, the study is inherently meant to be, it's kind of structured primarily around having conversations with people, because I think one of the biggest barriers to doing this stuff is just we don't feel equipped to have the answers for people right away. And I experienced that myself because I know some stuff about certain things, but I don't know everybody's objection, right? There are a million people. They usually fall into common categories, but every single person has kind of like a unique way that they object to the Christian faith or certain parts of it or whatever. And so, a couple of things. One is that this kind of thing, it does take practice. It's like a skill, almost. It does take practice and repetition to be able to have the conversations well. But then also, as an encouragement, there's a really good book by Greg Koppel called Tactics. And in that book, he has a really good phrase or a sentence that says, you don't have to have these big old conversations with everybody that you just try to win them over to the faith right away. you just try to talk with them and understand what they're saying, and then give them a little pebble in their shoe that they can kind of wrestle with. And then if your relationship with that person is strong enough and you have a follow-up conversation about it, well, then you explore a little more and you have a deeper conversation with them, and you together, the two of you, you kind of bring that person closer into truth, right? So those are the two things that I think I just wanted to kind of make sure we knew how the study is meant to be presented, and then just encourage that. Seeing this stuff, it can be overwhelming, but it is all stuff that is very manageable and does not have to be, you don't have to swallow the whole elephant at one time.
I do like that analogy, putting a pebble in one shoe. You get a pebble in your shoe, and it's going to be bothering you until what? Until you take your shoe off and deal with the pebble, right? And so you put the pebble in someone's shoe, and they have to deal with it. But you have to do that effectively, right? In a way that gets people to think and consider and ask questions. But just so you know, this isn't the only verse where this shows up. The idea of contending for the faith. Jude, in his letter, wrote that, "Dear friends, although I was eager to write to you about the salvation we share, I felt compelled to write and urge you to contend for the faith that was once for all entrusted to God's holy people." Right? Jude was concerned that false teachers were coming in and causing the believers to be led astray, right? And so he writes to them to contend for the faith. Paul writes in Philippians, he says something to the effect that, I was put here for the defense of the gospel. In Colossians, he writes to them saying, "Be wise in the way you act toward outsiders. Make the most of every opportunity. Let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone." In 2 Corinthians, he writes, "We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. And we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ." So Paul writes about this. Peter writes about this. Jesus did it. Consider all the interactions he had with the Pharisees, right? They come with some accusation or some question, and he answers them. He shows them how they are in error, how they don't know the scriptures, and so on. We see the apostles, right, arguing from scripture that Jesus is the Christ, he is the Messiah, and so on. But I think apologetics has an important place, right? It helps us defend attacks against Christianity. This is a kind of pre-evangelism, right? Where, you have objections, you have issues, intellectual issues, whatever it is. It helps kind of clear that stuff away. But it also gives a positive reason for Christianity, right? This is why you should be a Christian, because it's true. Because of this and this and this. Consider these things, right? It's an integral part of evangelism. But also helps believers who doubt their faith, right? One of the statistics we saw earlier was that, one of the reasons young adults are leaving the church is because the church doesn't take their doubts very seriously, right? Just have faith. Just have faith. When they have serious questions, they have serious obstacles. Don't think about that, right? Apologetics helps believers who doubt their faith. It helps shore you up. So I think there's at least 3 reasons why we should do apologetics. I think the Bible commands it. I think, and I stole this from Norman Geisler, I think our culture demands it. We have to, we are in our culture, right? We're not isolationists. We are called to be ministers of Christ, to be in the world but not of the world. And I think the church needs it. We have young people, maybe old people, having doubts, having questions. And they need to be encouraged. So, C.S. Lewis wrote this in The Weight of Glory. Actually, The Weight of Glory, apparently. I don't know who wrote The Weight of Glory. It wasn't C.S. Lewis. But he says, to be ignorant and simple now, not to be able to meet the enemies on their ground, would be to throw down our weapons and to betray our uneducated brethren who have, under God, no defense but us against the intellectual attacks of the heathen. Good philosophy must exist, if for no other reason, because bad philosophy needs to be answered. There's a lot of bad thinking out there. There's a lot of bad ideas. And as Christians, we shouldn't just ignore it, right? What about our brothers and sisters in Christ who don't know what's going on, who encounter these bad ideas? They have no defense. If for no other reason, good philosophy or good apologetics or whatever must exist if for no other reason, because bad philosophy needs to be answered. And so, where do we start? Where do we start as a church? I think we start with truth and love. We spend a lot of time, and I kind of try to bring this in every time I teach. What should you do as a Christian? If you can do nothing else, what should you do? You should love and serve, right? You should act and operate by grace, right? You should do that. Truth's important too, though. Paul writes, as a result, we are no longer to be children, tossed here and there by waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by the trickery of men, by craftiness and deceitful scheming, but speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in all aspects into him who is the head, even Christ. Speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up. This is part of Christian maturity. This is part of being a mature Christian, is speaking the truth in love, right? And so, okay, we start with truth. We start with truth. Now, the question of truth, it's interesting, right? I think everyone here probably has an intuitive idea of what truth is, but our culture, our culture in general, and especially the media and the university seems to be in like this schizophrenic state regarding the notion of truth. On the one hand, we're involved in our normal, everyday obligations, right? Your finances, money, your health, safety, your relationships, so on and so forth. Everyone seems to know what truth is when it comes to those things. But when it comes to the questions which really inform the most important things, like, how did I get here? Is there meaning? Is there purpose? Where am I going, right? What about morality? How do I know what is right and wrong? These kinds of questions, truth's just kind of thrown out the window. So everyone, I think, I would argue, has an intuitive understanding of truth, but we seem to be in this culture where it's almost like a post-relative culture now, where it's just, it used to be, there is no truth, or truth is relative, but truth doesn't matter. But I find this question interesting because Jesus was asked this question: what is truth? If you turn to John 18, we know when Jesus came before Pilate, and it says here, Pilate entered his headquarters again and called Jesus and said to him, "Are you king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you say this of your own accord, or did others say it to you about me?" Pilate answered, Am I a Jew? Your own nation and chief priests have delivered you over to me. What have you done? Jesus answered, My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting, that I may not be delivered over to the Jews. But my kingdom is not from the world. Then Pilate said to him, So you are a king? Jesus answered, You say that I am a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice. Pilate said to him, What is truth? What is truth? And then he goes out. He didn't seem to wait for the answer, which it's It's a interesting encounter. Like, why did Pilate ask this? Was it just rhetorical? Was he mocking Jesus? You know, you say you're the truth. Well, what is truth? Was he mocking him? Was he just being ironic? Because obviously the truth in this trial did not matter, right? Jesus says, "I am the truth." He says, "What is truth?" This is a sham trial that Jesus is going through. Was he giving Jesus' words a quasi-philosophical thought? Was he like, "Yeah, what is truth? You know, philosopher, you know, what is it?" Like, I don't really know, and I don't think we can know for sure from the text what the point of him saying this was. But I do know that Pilate was a self-serving politician, right? And it may be that the truth to him was whatever serves his purposes, whether it's deceiving people or whatever. And so he's just kind of making this statement. But what's interesting to me is you have the personification of truth right before him, and then he says, "What is truth?" It's right there. Personification of truth is right there. The source of truth, the God-man, he's right there. But I do think Pilate knew what truth was, because what does he do? He goes out to the Jews and says, "I find no guilt in him." Right? Is that true? Right. I find no guilt in him. And so I think Pilate did know what truth was. We can maybe have discussions about, like, well, what is the point of that question? Like, what is the significance of that question? But I think it's the same question that many people have today. What is the truth? What is it? What is the truth about your life? Who are you? Were you made for something? Or is this just all pointless? What is the truth? Kind of diving in a bit more, the topic of truth is often divided into kind of like two categories. I'm going to explain why I don't think subjective truth is actually a thing, but this is the way that some people talk about it. Okay, objective truth depends on the way the world actually is, and subjective truth depends on our opinions of things. And so the difference might be that, it is objectively true that I am standing here right now, right? That's not really up for debate, right? It's true for all people, in all places, and really all time, that right now I am standing here, right? That's an objective truth. Whereas some might cast a subjective truth is like, my favorite flavor of ice cream is chocolate chip cookie dough, right? Well, it's not true for you that that's your favorite ice cream. It's true for me. So it's really just my opinion. But I think even the subjective truths are really objective, because when I say my favorite ice cream is chocolate chip cookie dough, it is objectively true for all people in all places that my favorite ice cream is chocolate chip cookie dough. It's still an objective truth, even though I'm just expressing an opinion of what I think the best ice cream is, right? And so really I think all truth ultimately is objective. But how do we actually define truth? What is its definition? And there's a point to all this, right? There's a point to all this, and it has great bearing on us as Christians. How do we define it? Well, here's, I gave an attribution there. Telling the truth is telling it like it is. Very intuitive, right? We just operate this way. We just operate this way. Yet we live in a society which is like, nope, don't want to do that. And it's also interesting to me that the temptation was not telling it like it is. It was questioning the truth, right? Serpent came to Eve, did God really say? It was questioning what really was. So that's my definition. But let's look at some smart people. And so we have Aristotle. He wrote, to say of what is that it is not, or to say of what is that it is not, or of what is not that it is false. While to say of what is that it is, and of what is not that it is not, is true. You got to love these old Greek philosophers. Maybe you can get it a little bit simpler. So Anselm of Canterbury wrote, to say of what is that it is, nope. Yeah, I got it. My slides are behind here. All I know is that when a proposition, that's just like a statement, signifies that what is the case, then it is true and there is truth in it. Here's another guy, Thomas Aquinas. Apparently, he was not a very handsome man. Anyways, truth is defined by the conformity of intellect and thing. And hence, to know this conformity is to know truth. So when there is a correspondence with what you're thinking and the way the world actually is, you have truth. If what you're thinking does not correspond to the way the world is, you don't have truth. Here's an atheist. Even he knows what truth is. A mind, and Bertrand Russell was very big in philosophy. He writes, a mind which believes when there is a corresponding complex. This correspondence ensures truth, and its absence entails falsehood. He's saying the same thing. When there's a correspondence with thought and thing, with thought and reality, you have truth. Okay? This is known as truth as correspondence. Okay? Truth expresses the way things actually are or the way things actually exist. There is truth when there is a correspondence between thought and thing. That is, when your thought or your statement or whatever matches reality, you have truth. Okay? So what does truth depend on? Not your perspective. Depends on reality. You're right. It depends on reality, the way things actually are. So the only way to get around this is to deny reality. And what do we call people who deny reality? They're crazy people. Go ahead.
Could you give us an example of how this works? Like you have like a statement that you could show us and demonstrate that it's true versus false.
Okay. So I'll say this. My wife is not pregnant, right? Okay. If it was the case that she actually was, I would not be speaking the truth, right? But I am speaking the truth as far as I know. Yeah, so was that good enough? We're gonna do some exercises later, which hopefully you guys find fun. So the idea here is if what I believe about the world matches the way the world actually is, then my belief about the world is true. Okay? All right. Therefore, whatever is true about the world is true for everybody. Well, why is that? Because we all live in the same reality. We all live in the same reality. So whatever is true about reality is objectively true for all people. It's true for everyone. Okay, there is going to be some payoff with this, okay? Just bear with me. And there's a reason we're starting on this idea of truth. And we'll hammer that out here in a few minutes. But first, we're going to do some logic, okay? Any questions up to this point? Does anybody not know what truth is? Telling it like it is. You're telling the truth when you're telling it like it is. And you can tell it like it is because there is a reality that is. Okay, let's do some logic. What's the opposite of true? Not true. There's another word for that. False. Right? The opposite of truth is falsity. So the opposite of true is false. Okay? Believe it or not, this simple little, I guess, fact of reality or principle of reality does a lot for us. But what people who like to make things more complicated did is they came up with a name for this thing. It's called the law of non-contradiction. Okay? That comes from the opposite, that truth and falsity are mutually exclusive, right? They have no, falsity is the opposite of truth, okay? A thing cannot both be and not be at the same time and in the same sense. What does that mean? What does that mean? Huh? That's actually one of my examples. A married bachelor. What does it mean to be married, right? What does it mean to be a bachelor? They have opposing meanings, right? You can't have a married bachelor. You can't have a man-woman. Sorry, okay, anyways. Exactly, right? I cannot both exist and not exist at the same time in the same sense. I exist now. Let's say I die. My body doesn't exist anymore, right? But right now, I exist. I cannot both exist and not exist at the same time, right? In the same sense. Some objections, it used to be true that the sun revolved around the earth, but now it's true that the earth revolved around the sun. What do you say to that? Like, well, no, reality is always a certain way. It's just our beliefs about reality have changed, right? All right. So there's that first example. Here's some examples. A man cannot both be married and be non-married at the same time in the same sense. There's no such thing as married bachelors. Okay? Another example. The tree in my yard cannot both exist and not exist at the same time in the same sense. To say so would be nonsensical. The non-existing tree that exists back in my backyard, like, what does that mean? That doesn't make any sense, right? A polygon cannot both be a circle and a non-circle. There's no such thing as square circles. Because the definition of a circle, where you have each point equidistant from one point, the circle, is not the same definition as what a square is. And so, try all you want, you're not going to be able to draw a square circle because their definitions, what they are not the same. They're opposed to each other. A man cannot both be rich and not rich. He's either wealthy or he's not. Now you might say, well, this man is, rich in material stuff, but poor in spirit or something like that. Well, those aren't the same things. You're talking about two different things. You're talking about his wealth in one case. You're talking about his spiritual life in another, right? Those aren't the same things. You cannot be both rich and not rich at the same time in the same sense. Is this making sense? Okay. Truth necessarily excludes its opposite. So this law, like the idea of objective truth, applies to all people, at all times, in all places, and it's objectively true, and it's undeniable, right? To deny this idea, you have to assume the idea to deny it, because you're saying that can't be true. It's like, well, that's what the idea is saying, is that something can't be true and false at the same time and in the same sense. You have to assume this principle. And this might sound all complicated, but we all live like this. We all know this intuitively, right? I think it's because God is a God of order. He's not a God of contradiction, right? So we're going to go, I'm going to test you guys now, okay, to kind of bring this out a little bit, and then we'll kind of get the payoff here at the end. I'm going to put up some statements, and I want you to tell me what's wrong with it. I'll do the first one, though, to kind of get at what I'm getting at. If I say, I cannot write a word in English, what's wrong with that statement? I just wrote it in English, right? So that's a false statement. It's self-defeating. And so because truth is objective, because the opposite of true is false, contradictions are necessarily just untrue. They're meaningless. They're self-defeating. And so a self-defeating statement is a statement that fails to meet its own standards. I cannot write a word in English. Well, you just wrote a word in English. How about this one? God told me he doesn't exist. What's wrong with that statement? Right. God has to exist to tell you he doesn't exist, right? And so it's just a nonsensical statement. Okay, so we're going to get to the more difficult ones. There is no truth. Somebody tells you, there is no truth. Is that true? Right? If there is no truth, then this statement cannot be true. It's self-defeating. You cannot deny that there's truth without affirming that there's truth. So how can it be true that there is no truth? Well, he says, well, it's not. Then, okay, your statement's meaningless. No one knows the truth. Right, like if you say that no one knows the truth, you're saying you know something that's true, so your statement's false. No one can know any truth about religion, right? Except for you, right? How do you know that? You seem to be claiming that you know some truth about religion. Now, we're doing this just because the statements that when you're in an actual conversation are not usually this, they're not put this way, right? They just aren't. When somebody says no one can know the truth about religion, they're just kind of just saying like, how can anyone really know, right? There's more of an existential thing there. But we can show like, well, no, there is truth. We can know some truth. So why can't we know some truth about religion? Here's one. The only truth we know is what science gives us. Scientism. The idea that all truth comes from science. Right, this statement does not stand up to its own claim. Science did not reveal that to us. Did we get a little test tube and put some water in there, and if it turns one color, this is true, and it turns another color, that's false? No, science did not reveal this to us. This is more of a philosophical claim than one about what science actually tells us. All truth depends on your perspective. Right? Is that just your perspective? Right. It's if all truth depends on your perspective, then the truth that all truth depends on your perspective, then that's just your perspective. You're not making a claim about truth at all. You're just voicing an opinion. So the upshot of all this is that truth wins. But it does have some bearing. This topic of truth and how logic works has some bearing on us. Why are you a Christian? Is that your perspective? Why are you a Christian? I'll tell you why I'm a Christian. I'm a Christian because I believe that Christianity is true, and it's objectively true. Okay? And if Christianity is objectively true, then anything opposed to it is false. It's not the way the world is. Right? If Christianity is true and describes the way the world is, if it's true that Jesus predicted and accomplished his own death or resurrection, then anything opposed to that is false. Saying that Jesus did not do that is false, if he actually did do that. It's not a matter of perspective. Either God exists or he doesn't. right? Either Jesus rose from the dead or he didn't. Either Jesus is God or he's not. Either Jesus is the only way to the Father or he's not, right? And those are the kinds of questions that people have problems with. Jesus is the only way. God exists. Jesus rose from the dead. God has a plan for you. You can have eternal life by believing in what he did for you through his Son. That's either true or it's not. So, I'm a Christian because I believe Christianity is true. It corresponds to the way things are. It makes sense of the world. I believe it because I think it's true. C.S. Lewis has another great quote. He writes in a paper that he wrote, but he says, "I believe in Christianity as I believe the sun has risen, not only because I see it, but because by it I see everything else." And so he's making the appeal here. It's not just because it's true, but it's really the light by which I see everything else. It's the light by which this reality makes sense. So going through all that, the point here is not to beat people over the head with truth, right? But it's to realize that we are in a relativistic culture where truth, God's truth, is being attacked. It's being denied, it's being ignored, it's being doubted, right? But whatever is true is objectively true, and it's true for all people, at all times, in all places. And so, as Christians, we're handling truth. We're dealing with questions of truth, with the way the world is. But we need to remember, to keep in mind, the point is not to win arguments. It's to win souls. It's to help and encourage our brothers and sisters in Christ. It's to clear the bush and the rubble so that people can clearly see and consider the cross. We do this with gentleness, respect, gentleness, and reverence. And so, I apologize for giving you a primer on logic, but we want to spend some time talking about this idea of truth, because if truth doesn't exist, then none of this matters. It doesn't matter. Truth does exist, right? There is a reality that we live in. And the reality is that God made the world. He sent his Son for us, and that by believing in him, we can have eternal life. So that's all I got for you. I think next time, talking about the existence of God. Is that right, Rick? Any questions? Any castigations?
Jeremiah? I think all this, I like your point. The whole point is not just win the argument. The point of it all is to find out how you can, so the examples of music, because people actually say those things in different ways, and our job is to expose it from the falsehood that it is without causing offense to people, to cause them to push away or really just have a distaste for what we do and how we do it. And so that's where the balance and the skill of it all comes into play. But all this stuff is really important. It is really important because a lot of people, they start with this idea that it is all relative. There's nothing that you can genuinely know, and so you do have to answer these objections more often than you think. But doing it in a way that is, I guess, just so that it's not so it brings them further in and not pushes them further away. That's where the toughness of it is, I think. Because people get offended really easily. You start challenging them on stuff. So you have to do it in a way that shows them that it's wrong, but not so much that it makes them angry at you and not want to talk to you again.
It's kind of funny. It was a few weeks ago, and I have these. So in my department, I'm the manager. I have these two employees who kind of sit opposite me, and they like to go back and forth on politics and religion and stuff like that. And I forgot what one guy said, but another guy said, "Well, I guess just depends on what you believe." And I just little comment assassin. I was like, "Burp." I was like, "Does it really depend on what you believe, or does it actually depend on what's real?" And he's like, "Oh, good point." I was like. That was it. We didn't, I went back to being a manager. But it's kind of funny how these things come up. Lewis?
Yeah, one of my thoughts on all this when it comes to seeking truth, this is important for the whole world and what we deal with in our culture, but I think even within our own church communities too, because I feel like the very common thing that's growing within church is this emotionalism that leads people to believing a lot of false doctrines and false beliefs about their faith and about who God is and how God interacts with us and so on and so forth, and leads to bad Christian practice. And it's kind of funny, and this is going to be a really, really extreme example, okay? But I watched a documentary not too long ago about Jonestown.
Oh.
It's a really extreme, but think about this. Jim Jones started off as a pastor of a church, a very extreme, emotional, charismatic church, and these people did not question truth. They didn't have questioning minds, I guess, because they were led to believe these awful beliefs about their faith and doctrine and society and so on and so forth that led them to their death. And I know this is an extreme example, but still nonetheless, I think even just knowing things like this is just have a questioning attitude about what's being taught to you and what you're learning based on everything. Like not just the church, but you should things you hear on YouTube, things you hear on television, so on and so forth. And even with your kids, have a questioning mind, a questioning attitude to seek truth objectively. It's not emotional.
It's almost like we've taken it for granted that we could know things about reality. Like God has given us this mind that can know. It can know Him, right? The lawyer comes up to Jesus and Jesus and he asks him what the greatest command is. Love the Lord God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. Right? Using your mind is something we need to be doing as Christians. We saw the stats earlier. The church is, especially the evangelical church, is thought to be anti-intellectual or anti-science or anti-this or anti-that. But we're not, right? I hope we're not. And we can do our part to love the Lord with our minds as well, which I think we often neglect. Yep.
It's kind of in reference to what Lewis said with Jonestown. They did not question the pastor. But so, as a new Christian, let's just say, how do you know what is the truth? You don't know what you don't know. So how do you know that who you are going to, who your pastor is really speaking the truth versus their interpretation of the truth? As a new Christian, if you don't know, you don't know.
Yeah.
So you could be easily misled and have no idea.
For sure, and that happens all the time. My encouragement to people is to be a Berean, right? To, when Paul was writing about the Bereans, you looked into the scriptures and saw that what we were saying was true, right? And that should be every Christian, right? Just because I'm up here speaking, or Jeremiah or Stephen or Rick or whoever, doesn't mean that we're flawless, we don't make mistakes. As Christians, be a good Berean. See if it's true. You can know truth. Now, I can't do anything about other churches and new Christians elsewhere that are going through this, right? Maybe they're part of the more emotional church, the mega church mentality, and they suffer from this. And it's, I can't do anything about that, but we have control over what we can do. And so, you know, and this is also a question of discipleship too, you know, the really being intentional about being a disciple of Jesus, learning more about him. I don't know if that answers your question. I don't have like the solution, right, per se, other than it's my conviction that as Christians we need to be doing our due diligence. We need to be seeking people who are trustworthy, who have proved themselves to speak the truth. That's all I got. Anything else on that?
Yeah, I kind of think it's like, you know, if you've ever been in my math classroom, you know, very objective place, math is. But, you know, if you're learning, you have to have a place that you can be able to make mistakes, you know. And so as we come together as a church, you know, it's almost like we come from the world in here, and this is where we have to be able to battle ourselves, or battle to find the truth, right? You know, and we have to be willing to be wrong, you know, to make mistakes, because that's part of our learning process. To be challenged in our thinking, because you know we might show up next Sunday as Rick's talking about the existence of God, and we might have our little thing. Okay, well, I believe in the existence of God just because my grandparents told me it was true, you know, and if that's all that you have, that's not going to hold up out there, right? But in here, as we battle it together, as we learn together, it can shore it up so that out there, when someone says, why do you believe in the existence of God, you might have something to go off of here to present the truth. Even if I'm wrong about it, even if I come in here wrong, that doesn't change the truth. You know, I'm just wrong and I haven't learned yet. It's just like in math, you know, I might think I know how to do something, but then I come in the classroom and realize, oh, I actually don't know what I don't know and things like that. Well, I always tell my students, well, why do I bring you in here? So that I teach you how to do multiplication. So that when you go out into the world, you get your job and you say, well, there's 20 stacks of 13 over there. And your boss says, well, how much is that? And you're like, 20 stacks of 13, I don't know, right? I teach them how to do that so that when they go out there, they can give an answer. And so what this is saying is, you know, in here, we learn together, so that out here we can make a defense. You know, out there we can make a defense to everyone who asks us. So I think we have to be willing in here to, be vulnerable a little bit, be willing to be wrong, but also to be willing to grow and learn. I'd rather us, I don't want to say this, don't get me the wrong one, but I'd rather us make a mistake right here with each other, you know, to say something dumb every once in a while, than out there where we're dealing with people who don't believe, you know, who don't have faith, you know. We lean on faith, but I found that the more we study, the more that faith gets founded on evidence, you know. And I think we don't just believe Christianity because it's the best out of the selection, you know. We believe it because it's objectively true. And that's, I think, what we're trying to get to, right? How can we show that Christianity is objectively true?
I think grace and love cover a lot of mistakes. So as the church, this should be the place where we can do what Stephen's talking about. Who was first? John's pointing to Kendra, so I'm going with that.
Well, I was thinking to remind me of 2 Peter that we just went through. Like, how do you find the people that you can trust? You think about like the marks of Christian maturity. I guess that's probably a good way. Like, yes, we talk about searching the scriptures and what the scriptures say about those who have the truth, and the people who say what the apostles said, that say what scripture says, that have marks of Christian maturity, of like growing in virtue, who are still humble, who are loving, who are gracious, who have both the character of the Christian, of the like solid disciple, and then also who have the answers that match what the Bible says. So, and I think like the whole point of you can't learn without humility, right? So like we come to this place and we hear what you all teach us, and we come with like a humble attitude and we accept what is wrong, and we try to learn from that. That's next, but
Thanks, dear.
Thank you. Thank you, my not pregnant wife. Jeremiah?
So my last thing, kind of in response to your question, Melissa, to add to what Levi said, is that if somebody is new to the faith, and if there hasn't been somebody who was directly impactful to that process, they just kind of were exploring it on their own and came to this realization and they trusted in faith, then you would want to steer that person towards somebody that either they trust, that you know is solid in their faith, or somebody that you trust that could be a person that they can utilize as a resource, or just an example of how to be a Christian, how to be a follower, because that's the concept of discipleship that Levi was talking about. Because that's essentially that's the concept that comes into play, is that there's evangelism on the pre-believing side for people. So if they're not a Christian, you evangelize to them, you tell them the gospel, you make a defense of faith. They become a believer, they trust in Christ, and now our job is to, as the church, as people, our job is to disciple on the back end of it and help people grow. So, but that, and this is one of the things that we at Renewal have constantly. There's so many conversations that we've had. How do we disciple well? Because it is such a individual thing, and it's a very personal and intimate sort of thing that you can do it in this context, like group setting, but to be most effective, I think if you can get closer to a one-on-one, that does better. So to your question, like how does a new Christian know that they're following somebody that's actually trustworthy or actually got a good reputation? Well, it's gonna bring in this idea of who do you trust and who do they trust? Because if you can tell, like, John is a really good example of this, and like, nah, I don't trust John. I just don't have a good relationship, or they just don't have a relationship with John that he would be able to work with, right? But so and so down the street, that they've been going to church for however long, they have a good testimony, and that they've got a more relationship with that person, steer that person towards them. That'd be more kind of rubber meets the road example, I guess.
I think a big key is, and I was just thinking just now about like the statistics we were looking at, and like one of the big turnoffs for people is that the church doesn't take their doubts seriously, right? And so this is a community thing. Like, we are a community, and we grow as a community. And so, a new Christian needs to have a good community of believers, so that discipleship can happen, so that growth can happen. I'm a very big opponent of lone wolf Christianity. Right? I'm just going to do it on my own. I'm good. I don't need people. No, you do. Precisely because you don't know what you don't know. Like, you need people in your life. And so, that would be my encouragement to anybody who's a new Christian. Like, you need to find a community. You need to find a good community who is searching for truth. People know if you're just searching after experiences or if you're searching for truth. It's pretty, it's obvious, right? If people are just following a feeling, or if they're actually looking for what's true. Any final comments? We're about to go over time. We're already over time, but I guess now that we don't have to like break down and stuff, it's a lot easier. Esther?
Maybe we should have a session sometime collecting common doubts that beginner Christians and long-term Christians also have. Satan likes to attack us with that. And, we're so busy in life, we're holding on to our faith, we're holding on to studying the Word, but maybe sometime doing a collection of those doubts and then seeing through them together would be kind of helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, sounds good. Let's speed through this Revelation study so we can do that. All right. Well, that's all I have for you. Brick. All right, let's pray, and then you can move about the country. Lord God, we just we thank you for your Son, Jesus, who is the truth, source of all truth, and we just help us, Lord, to wrestle with these things, to grow, to seek after the truth. Help us, Lord, to grow in our faith, to grow in our knowledge of you and what you've done, that we may be effective witnesses and ministers of your truth. We just give you thanks. We thank you for our community, and we pray, Lord, that you be with us now as we just go about the rest of our day and our week, and help us to grow, Lord, to grow and be more like Jesus, to grow in love, to grow in truth. We just thank you and pray this in your name. Amen.